Good morning, plant-based buddies. I got into work a little early today, 7:45. My first patient is at 8:30, and I thought it was a great idea to make a video on sugar because I've been seeing that pop up in my feed lately, how sugar is good or sugar is bad. I think people don't have a clear understanding of where sugar fits in the spectrum of what carbs are, right? So keep in mind that sugar can be simple, complex, and sugar is simply a name that we typically use to refer to simple carbs. Now, much in the same way as protein is a chain of amino acids, carbohydrates are chains of saccharides. Now, saccharides are different molecules of sugars that are chained together. So if you have a mono or disaccharide, one saccharide or two saccharide, disaccharide, those are typically what we call simple sugars. When you have 3 to 11 saccharides, we call them oligosaccharides. And when you have more than 11 polysaccharides or complex carbs. Now, people tend to mix up carbs and sugar and complex and simple and think that simple is bad and carbs are good or carbs are bad, and it's all a big mass confusion. Now, the most important thing to understand is that what makes a carb healthy or not is basically the food that it was packaged in and not its chemical structure. Now, if you look at glucose, that's a monosaccharide. Fructose is a monosaccharide. And certain sugars in milk, like galactose, is a monosaccharide. Now, these only have one saccharide. That doesn't tell us anything about whether they're good or whether they're bad. If fructose comes from an apple, as a great source of fructose, and fructose, when consumed in a whole food surrounded by a matrix of fiber, polyphenols, and other phytochemicals, behaves much differently in our bodies than when you use fructose consumed in a Pepsi. Now, high fructose corn syrup has a bad reputation, but it's not because it's high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is simply a combination of fructose and glucose to form a disaccharide in a ratio of something like 40 to 60. 40 to 60 glucose to fructose. Now, if you're looking at table sugar, white sugar, also called sucrose, it's 50-50 glucose fructose. Now, how can fructose from fruit be healthy and fructose in a Pepsi be unhealthy? Well, it depends on what it's packaged with. So when people say sugar is the enemy, no, sugar is not the enemy. Sugar added to already unhealthy foods to make it more palatable is the enemy, okay? And even when sugar, simple sugars that are added to unhealthy foods are consumed at caloric maintenance, so you're not over-consuming calories, sugar shows no sign of causing disease. The issue isn't the sugar itself. The issue is that we put sugar in ultra-processed foods to make them tastier, and then people overeat them, okay? So if you need to sprinkle some brown sugar on your oatmeal for it to be palatable or tasty, and you're able to keep your calories within maintenance so that you don't gain weight, There's nothing wrong with brown sugar. There's nothing wrong with maple syrup or white sugar. Now, the issue is that when you use something that's very, very tasty, people tend to overconsume it. And that's where the issue is with sugar. So it's not that high fructose corn syrup is the enemy. Is that high fructose corn syrup is simply used in highly processed foods to make them sweeter, so we eat more, so we have more calories. We're in a caloric excess, we gain weight, and obesity leads to inflammation. It's not inherently the sugar that's bad. Because sugar from fruit, or sugar or carbs, or which are simple or complex, from fruit, and veggies have sugar, and whole grains have them, and beans have them. It's not the carb, whether it's simple or complex, short chain or long chain, that is the issue. The issue is simply that we're overeating calories. Now, even complex carbs can be both healthy or unhealthy depending on the packaged food that we eat it from. So if you eat complex carbs through white bread, a ultra-processed food, it will behave much differently than eating complex carbs coming from brown rice, or coming from whole wheat bread, or coming from from legumes. Now, complex carbs don't get absorbed in the same way depending on what food they're packaged with. Carbs aren't the enemy. The issue is that we're eating ultra-processed foods where the the food matrix, the fiber, the polyphenols, the phytochemicals have been removed so that food doesn't spoil or spoils later. And that's what we're eating, right? So the issue isn't whether you have a short saccharide chain, like a simple sugar, or a simple carb, like glucose, fructose, galactose, or a disaccharide, like sucrose or lactose. The issue isn't whether or not the saccharide chain is short or whether or not it's long. Because in each of these scenarios, you can eat foods that contain simple carbs and simple sugars that are healthy, and foods that are not. And on the other scenario, you can eat carbs, complex carbs, that means carbs that have a long saccharide chain that take longer to digest, and they can still be unhealthy if it's always consumed in an ultra-processed form. Or you can eat complex carbs that are coming from beans, chickpeas, lentils, whole grains that are super healthy, or sweet potatoes that are super healthy, right? So the issue isn't the sugars, the issue isn't the carbs, the issue is the food. Now, the same thing goes for a lot of other things. When people eat protein or meat protein, they get a series of amino acids. So people say you need meat to get protein. Now, meat is an excellent source of amino acids, which are the chains, the links that build the chain of protein. But when you're eating protein from meat, you're also getting cholesterol, saturated fat, heme iron. You're getting zero fiber, zero phytochemicals, and about 64 times less antioxidants than you would get with the equivalent amount of protein coming from plants. Plant protein comes packaged with zero or almost zero saturated fat, with zero cholesterol, with a ton of fiber, with phytochemicals, with non-heme iron instead of heme iron. A lot of components in plant protein are naturally anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. About 64 more times antioxidants in the average plant than the average animal product. So you can do what you want, but at the end of the day, the issue is not necessarily that one is better or one is less. It's more a matter of your overall dietary pattern. That's going to be the most important thing, what you're eating most of the time. So when I say white bread is an ultra-processed food, it's complex carbs without the food matrix. The issue is not the white bread. The issue is that we eat a ton of white bread, and because we eat a ton of white bread, which is an ultra-processed food that has minimal fiber, we don't feel satiated, we don't feel full, we tend to overeat. White bread can be a part of a healthy dietary pattern. The issue isn't the white bread. The issue is that white bread is so ultra processed that it doesn't make us full. It doesn't contain the same nutrients in its original food matrix as the original grain did. It has much less fiber. And people that tend to eat a lot of white bread tend to eat a lot of other refined grains. And that leads to excessive calorie consumption. But if you're eating a mostly whole food diet, and you're within your caloric maintenance, so you're eating the amount of calories that'll keep you from gaining weight, whether or not you include sugar or white bread or a Pepsi in there is not the end of the world, right? So the issue isn't the carb or the sugar per se, it's the overall dietary pattern. But just know that people that tend to eat ultra-processed foods don't feel full, don't feel satisfied, have food cravings caused by massive dopamine release by ultra-processed foods that Mother Nature cannot compete with. And that tends to lead to overconsumption, okay? Ultra-processed foods tend to be more calorie dense and nutrient poor, meaning that your body will be left craving more food and people tend to overeat. But if you have the most disciplined person in the world, you can eat ultra-processed food, and if you're not in a calorie surplus, sugar and white bread and crap can play a role in your diet, and you can still have an overall healthy dietary pattern. Now, I feel that when I eat crap, I crave crap the next day. That's why I just tend to avoid it as much as I can. I do eat at the restaurant, I do eat cake, I do eat crap, but it plays a very, very minimal part in my overall diet on a daily basis. Whereas most people, studies show that they're getting anything between 40 and 60% of their daily calories from ultra-processed foods. Now, if this morning you ate white bread, a bagel, processed breakfast cereal, and a glass of orange juice, it's not each individual ultra-processed food that you had there that's the problem. It's that probably is 3 or 4 servings of ultra-processed food on your first meal, and it's going to leave you craving for more ultra-processed food. But if you eat that once in a while and the rest of the time you're eating whole foods, it's not a big deal whether you had white bread or orange juice or bagel. All right? I don't know if that makes sense. People tend to single out single foods, single nutrients, single health hacks. That's not the way health works. Health works by the balance of what you're doing over the long term. There are no superfoods, only super dietary patterns and super ways of living your life. You can have crap here and there. The issue is that it should occupy a maximum of 5 to 10% of your calories, whereas in today's Canadian and American diets, crap occupies 40 to 60%. And eating crap makes us crave crap and makes us eat more crap. And that puts us in a calorie excess that makes us gain weight, and that is driving chronic disease. And processed crap has almost no nutrition in it when compared to whole foods. So it's not the sugar to blame, or the fat, or the salt. It's the balance of eating ultra-processed foods for almost half of our daily calories every single day, which leads us in calorie excess and nutrient deficiency, and triggers a dopamine release so high that we crave ultra-processed foods all the time. And we build our dietary patterns around them. Like I say, almost half of people's calories are coming from ultra-processed foods, whereas it should be a few percent, not 60%. All right? Cool. I hope this makes sense. So if you see an influencer online that's blaming one food, or 5 foods you shouldn't eat, or 5 nutrients that are toxic, they likely do not have any background in nutritional science. All right? Coolio. All right, you have a good day. Have a good Friday. I'll try to come back on the weekend if I can. And if not, see you next week. Peace.